Hello, everyone. Let's try to understand the mechanisms of lung disease and thrombosis in patients of suffering from COVID-19. Let me at the outset start with the disclaimer that the following is a collation of my personal understanding and views regarding COVID-19 based on currently available data and anecdotal evidences, which as of now are limited. I thus claim to have no experience with managing any patients with COVID-19, but this I intend to be more of a ready reckoner for our doctor colleagues who are battling the COVID 19 pandemic in the ICUs across the world, and for general understanding for other doctors about the nature of the disease. In this presentation, I intend to decipher what's new that has emerged from studies over the last 2 months that would enhance our understanding of the nature of certain phenomena which we can expect to observe in patients with COVID 19. What's getting increasingly clear is the fact that COVID 19 is a disease with protean manifestations. Problems arising from RBC tropism has already been described in a previous presentation for which you can check my YouTube channel. In this presentation, my focus would be on deductions which can be made from the latest studies on the subjects of the lung disease in COVID 19, the possible mechanisms of pathogenesis, the types of lung disease phenotypes, how to clinically differentiate between phenotypes, and the question about interventions with regards to ventilation, whom to ventilate and whom not to. There's also new data which has emerged regarding thrombotic complications. What are the possible mechanisms and what are the pulmonary and systemic implications of thrombotic complications, and what are the therapeutic modalities which can be considered. Doctors who were at the front line in caring for the COVID-19 patients have been reporting about how they saw that the nature of COVID-19 pneumonia was very different from the manifestations which one would expect in other viral bronchopneumonias. There's already been some hypothesizing that there seems to be certain factors which are affecting the oxygenation of the blood in a significant subset of these patients. Going beyond anecdotal reports, finally a paper emerged from a set of intensive care physicians from Western Europe, led by Dr. Gattinoni, based on data collected from ICU patients in these countries at during the height of the epidemic. Recalling the way the virus adheres to the host cell is by the spike protein, also called the S protein, on the surface of the virus, which adheres to the host cell via the ACE2 enzyme, and by binding to the TMPRSS2 receptor, it causes activation of endocytosis of the virus by the host cell. Let's look at the likely mechanisms of pathogenesis. Recalling the renin-angiotensin system pathway, we know that angiotensinogen is broken down by renin to angiotensin 1, and this angiotensin 1 by the famed angiotensin converting enzyme 1 in the lung gets converted to angiotensin 2. This angiotensin 2, it's broken down to angiotensin 1,7 by ACE2 enzyme. Now, we very well know that the S protein on the SARS-CoV-2 virus binds the ACE2 enzyme in the lungs, and this phenomenon is observed in both the type 2 pneumocytes and the pulmonary vascular endothelium. As a consequence of ACE2 enzyme inhibition, we see that the angiotensin 2 levels increase while angiotensin 1,7 levels reduce. The physiological actions of both are contrary to each other. Angiotensin 2 causes vasoconstriction and increases production of oxygen-derived free radicals, which gives rise to a pro-inflammatory state, while angiotensin 1,7 has the entire opposite action of vasodilatation and reduction of production of oxygen-derived free radicals, and it basically creates an anti-inflammatory state. What happens because of ACE2 inhibition is that there is a loss of this homeostatic balance, hence causing a tilt towards a pro-inflammatory state, which gives rise to lung alveolar injury and pulmonary vascular endothelial injury. So, just to reiterate, the inhibition of the ACE2 enzyme by the SARS-CoV-2 virus causes an increase in pro-inflammatory state and a reduction in the anti-inflammatory state of cellular homeostasis. So, as a consequence of angiotensin 2 mediated pulmonary vasoconstriction and pro-inflammatory state, we see the plethora of lung alveolar injury play out in the form of alveolar rupture, inflammatory and cells and cytokine accumulation, pulmonary edema, type 2 pneumocyte injury, which causes surfactant deficiency, giving rise to ventilation failure, which Dr. Gattinoni was describing as the H type of COVID-19 lung disease, which is similar to other bronchopneumonia induced lung injury. According to Dr. Gattinoni, only 20 to 30% of the subjects qualified as classical ventilation failure in true ARDS sense, and he called them the H type of COVID-19 lung disease, manifesting with the four H's, which is high elastance and high lung weight as a consequence of increased inflammatory pulmonary edema, high right to left shunt because of ineffective ventilation, and preserved pulmonary vascular regulation to hypoxia in form of pulmonary vasoconstriction, and high recruitability because of increased non-ventilated alveolar units. These are the factors which affect pulmonary vascular regulation. What is notable is the hypoxia causes pulmonary vasoconstriction. In order to understand the other type of lung injury called the L type of lung injury by Dr. Gattinoni, it is important to understand and learn what are the new things which have emerged in the COVID-19 scenario in the past 2 to 3 weeks. Notably, the fact that COVID-19 being a prothrombotic stage, giving rise to both macro and microvascular injury. The few studies have emerged which state that, like this study from China, which shows an incidence of 25% of patients in the ICU having thrombotic complications. This study shows a 31% thromboelastography studies of the blood of COVID-19 patients support the theory of hypercoagulability. They also noted that some of the intubated patients with COVID-19 pneumonia had increased fibrinogen levels, factor 8 and von Willebrand factor levels, with the background of almost a normal or slightly prolonged PT-APTT, pointing to the fact that there is a prothrombotic state which is different from the classical DIC which is known in COVID-19 patients. Incidentally, we have autopsy data on COVID patients now, which corroborates with clinical evidence. We can see on the left side a lung which is red and boggy with reduced compliance, and on the right side we see a lung with multiple thrombus formation. We are aware that the Virchow's triad is instrumental in creating a prothrombotic state, which is manifested by stasis of blood, vascular endothelial injury, and alterations in constituents of blood. It was already understood in the pre-COVID era that the ACE2 enzyme was conferring protection to the vascular endothelium and hence preventing the development of a prothrombotic state. Hence, when the virus binds to the ACE2 enzyme, it probably takes away this protection to the endothelium, hence making the vessels more prone for formation of thrombus. As a consequence of vascular endothelial damage, we see a whole plethora of events manifesting. As a consequence of the damage to the endothelium, the subendothelial von Willebrand factor gets unveiled and released into the circulation, which combines with factor VIII and stimulates the intrinsic clotting pathway. The increased expression of vascular cell adhesion molecules causes platelet adhesion and aggregation, giving rise to pulmonary and systemic vascular thrombosis. Because of the angiotensin II action in the systemic vessels, there is a systemic vascular hypertension, and this in combination with the vascular thrombosis could give rise to both cerebral and cardiac vessel complications in the form of strokes and acute coronary syndromes. We also see that as a consequence of the lack of vascular regulation in the pulmonary vessels, there is no pulmonary vasoconstriction because of the endothelial dysfunction, giving rise to maldistribution of pulmonary blood flow, which in combination with the pulmonary vascular thrombosis gives rise to a perfusion oxygenation failure, which was described by Dr. Gattinoni as the L-type COVID-19 lung disease. So as per Dr. Gattinoni, a majority of these patients had an L-type COVID-19 lung disease, which was manifested by the four L's. One is the low elastance or high compliance and low lung weight, as there is lack of any inflammatory pulmonary edema. There is a low ventilation perfusion ratio, basically due to the loss of pulmonary vascular regulation due to hypoxia, and low recruitability because of the presence of increased well ventilated alveolar units, as this is not a problem of ventilation. Hence, we notice that there are three broad phenotypes in COVID-19 lung disease. One is the ventilation defects described as the H type of lung disease. Second is the perfusion oxygen defect because of pulmonary thrombosis, which is described as the L type of COVID-19 lung disease. The third is a pure oxygen defect, which is probably as a virtue of a decoupling of iron atoms from hemoglobin, which is less of a lung disease and more got to do with the RBC tropism of the virus, the description of which has been given in my previous presentation, for which you can look it up in my YouTube channel. As to clinically differentiating between the three broad phenotypes, we see that patients presenting with ventilation failures appear sicker at presentation, have a gradual progressive course. They have hypoxemia, but as they progress to ARDS, will have hypercapnia. They have increased work of breathing and tachypnea and have a proportionate desaturation to the lung condition. While patients presenting with oxygenation failures appear well initially but progress rapidly, they generally end up having bradycardia and arrhythmia early. The patients with perfusion oxygenation issues, especially one with pulmonary thrombi, generally have variable tachypnea and increased work of breathing, which is not though as severe as in case of ventilation failure. They have also features of tachycardia, but because of Basal-Jarisch reflex can have bradycardia. But what is notable in both the oxygenation and perfusion failures is that the level of desaturation is disproportionate to the degree of respiratory distress. Looking at the lung physiology of these three deficits, we know that all three can manifest with ARDS or ALI type of blood gases. What is notable is that the pulmonary vascular reactivity to oxygen is lost in perfusion deficits. Hence, the pulmonary thrombosis is the cause for pulmonary hypertension in perfusion deficits, while in ventilation it is because of hypoxemia. CT scans show a much diffuse ground glass opacification in ventilation defects, while in perfusion and oxygenation defects it is pretty patchy. Coming to the special tests, especially in perfusion oxygenation defects, testing for fibrinogen levels, D-dimer, von Willebrand factor, factor 8 levels, and anti-cardiolipin, anti-beta 2 microglobulin antibodies would definitely help predicting the course of prothrombotic complications. In ventilation and oxygenation defects, it is important to look for acute phase reactants. Ventilatory graphics in ventilation defects like the H type of lung shows low compliance. Hence, on invasive ventilation and lung protection strategies like optimal PEEP, low tidal volume, and optimal FiO2 with permissive hypercapnia shows a satisfactory response. But in the perfusion and oxygenation defects, which is classically the L type of lung, which display normal compliance, the response to mechanical ventilation and ARDS ventilation strategies may be poor. In perfusion defects, when there is normocapnia, it is advised to avoid invasive ventilation and instead try high flow nasal cannula, CPAP, or non invasive ventilation, as increased pressure could cause more harm than good in terms of ventilator induced lung injury. Of course, if there is coexistent hypercapnia, an invasive ventilation could be attempted in perfusion defects, but with a higher tidal volume and lower PEEP, again to prevent ventilator induced lung injury. In oxygenation defects, it is preferable to use high flow nasal cannula and avoid ventilation as much as possible. Dr. Gattioni noted that these lung phenotypes are not silos and it is a spectrum of manifestations, as it was observed that there were transition between these phenotypes, especially with a type L lung phenotype would slowly progress to a type H lung phenotype due to increased respiratory distress causing self-inflicted lung injury because of distress. It was also noted that the virus could progress from the pulmonary vasculature into the lung alveoli. Hence, as a treatment strategy, it is important to diversify beyond just antiviral therapy to mitigating the damage done because of both inflammation and oxygen derived free radical injury and prevent prothrombotic complications. Hence, as a consequence of these revelations, some of the ICUs have rehashed their treatment protocols, trying to incorporate anti inflammatory agents, anticoagulants, and antioxidants in their management protocol. This is from AIMS New Delhi, and the AIMS protocol also tends to corroborate with these changes, both the ventilation settings and with regards to anti-inflammatory and antioxidants. As more data becomes evident over the time, the whole gamut of what ominous secrets COVID-19 holds within its fold may get revealed. I thank you all for a patient hearing. I definitely appreciate comments, suggestions, and criticisms. You can do so in the comment section on my YouTube channel, or you can directly contact me on my email address. Thank you.